Alright, what's going on YouTube? Today we're going to check out Home Studio Drums Part 2, where I'm essentially going to go over everything that I did to mix the drums. If you haven't heard the whole song yet, then the link is in the description on the Fearless Genius channel. And if you haven't seen Part 1 of the video, then make sure you go and watch that first. The link is also in the description. Alright, so we have all the drum tracks here. We have the kick in, the kick sub, room left, room right, overhead left, overhead right, the snare SM57, the snare condenser mic, tom small, tom medium, and tom large, and they are at the drummer's perspective, so they're panned accordingly. So the small tom is on the drummer's left, and yeah, I use strip silence on the kick drum, and that is basically going to go over here and you type it in manually is how I did it, and essentially cuts out everything in between. It throws in the own like fade in, fade out thing so it doesn't pop at all. So I did that to clean it up. It's kind of like using a gate, but it literally cuts out all the fluff you don't need. There wasn't a whole lot of bleed anyways, more so on the condenser mic that was outside of the kick. But I went ahead and used strip silence on that one too. Couldn't do that on the snare because the drummer was doing a lot of ghost notes and I would have cut that out. But on the snare condenser microphone, that was a lot hotter and kind of like distorting. The ghost notes definitely came through like very well. I went ahead and used strip silence on that track to kind of cut out some of the extra distorted air. And I also used it on the toms, so we have just the tom hits. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and check out the plugins that I used, starting with the kick mics. And in case you don't know, this is PreSonus Studio One Professional that I am using. And I do have some third-party plugins that I was using. So first one was the stock Pro EQ on the kick. So I basically cut out some low mids to make it sound a little bit more like a modern clicky style kick. Increase some highs and some lows on it. And then we went to Brainworks Sub Filter, which this is kind of nice to add a essentially tight punch, low end, and some resonance to it. And then one of my favorites lately is the CLA drums plugin. And this one I ended up adding lower top spank compression, bass treble compression essentially. Definitely helps add to the sound of a nice kick drum. And the next thing here is the SPL Free Ranger, which is a style of EQ. Kind of just went with the preset that was the it says snare top, but it's not on that one. It was on a bass drum. Then we went with SPL Attacker, and then we went ahead and used a limiter, which was the stock Studio One limiter. I have it on soft clip so that I can basically increase the volume of this kick without letting it clip. With the sub, I ended up using a mix tool to invert the phase because it was out of phase with my other kick. And sub filter again, so we add some less tight punch but more low end. Designed to be the low end beefier microphone that adds kind of the bass to the kick drum. But similar EQ on it where I cut some highs, more highs, and a little bit more low. And then the CLA drum plugin again. And then we had the BX Opto compressor. I also used another preset that was bass mellow, I believe. Then we got kind of like a really nice little soft, bassy sounding sub kick. And together, it kind of looks like I did a lot, but it's all kind of like in small amounts per plugin, so it's somewhat subtle. Then moving on to the room mics. I've really been digging having two room mics left and right because it really adds a lot of a roomy sound that's kind of like a bit of a natural reverb, which is very nice, especially for this style of music. And I do have them going to Ascend. That is the CLA Unplugged. That this is basically the reverb that I have it on. And just a little bit of EQ to kind of cut out some of the bass stuff in these room mics, clean them up a bit, some frequencies that were a little bit strange in some of the cymbals, and then CLA plugin on the room setting, a little bit of bass, not too much top at all, and a little bit of compression. And so with those room mics, so you also have them pretty low in the mix. They're just like kind of like subtle little tasteful things. All right, so on the overheads here, again, not a whole lot that I've done, just a little bit of EQ. These were cutting out some strange cymbal frequencies, and then a little bit of low cut and a little bit of high cut. And then again, CLA drums plugin on the overhead setting, and it basically just adds a little bit of flavor. I was trying to make the overheads not too crispy, but just kind of like light and airy a little bit. Moving on to the snare. So the snare, we started out with just a little bit of EQ, low cut, and then adding a little bit of bass. Not a lot here, just kind of like a little something for the close mic. And then again, the CLA plugin, as you can tell that I really enjoy using this, with the snare here. So we got a little bit of compression, bass treble. This time we are using a little bit of the studio reverb, because then following that we have the BX subfilter again, a little bit of high resonance, and some punch is actually on this is the snare low punch preset, I believe. And then I usually start with a preset and then I'll go ahead and move from that. And we have this filter that's pretty awesome. I use this preset a lot, called Up Front, and then I dial it back, and it's basically gonna make, you guessed it, make the snare sound up front. And then again, we have a limiter that is on the soft clip setting to make the snare louder without clipping. Because kick and snare are like the most important drums, like without a doubt. So you want those to cut and you want those to be beefy. And when you're in the process of that, you usually end up making, you maybe make them too loud in the mix and they start clipping. And the other thing that we did for the snare was add this condenser mic, which was very distorted, and was going to be to add grit to the snare. So we keep that one a lot lower in the mix. And the EQ I did was basically just simple low cut, high cut filters, and then a little bit of the CLA. It kind of acts like a under snare mic, adding a little bit of like wire sound. Well, it's not really wire, it's more like distortion, but it sounds that way, and it kind of helps add a little bit of extra ring to the snare, adds a little character, a little bit of grit, and helps it cut, makes it a little more interesting. So these toms are pretty good, didn't have to do a whole lot. Just a little EQ where we boosted some low frequencies, and cut out some because I didn't want them to be, I was trying to just go for really like attacking toms, and a little scoop of the mids and a little increase on the highs, just to make that high tom just slap essentially. And then you guessed it, the CLA drums plugin on the tom setting, and this one's going to add a little bit of sub to counteract some of that bass that I cut out, a little bit of reverb, and and yeah, treble compression, and it's got a good amount of the drum reverb, the CLA unplugged, and similar things for the other tom. Find a hit here. This one did have kind of a weird ringing frequency here. So I went ahead and cut that out, added a little bit of high in my settings on the CLA plugin. And then the floor tom wasn't, when I solo it, it wasn't the best sounding like mic sound. I mean, it's decent, but it kind of wasn't my favorite sound. So I tried increasing the bass because it really didn't seem like it had enough bass on it. Maybe the Sennheiser may not be the best choice for the floor tom next time, but yeah, then I tried adding a little bit of sub on the CLA plugin, and so on and so forth. Then they're all going through the reverb, and so I show you what these toms sound like before. With again. So yeah, pretty happy with that tom sound. The floor tom is the only thing that I feel like I would have just used a different mic next time, and maybe try to get a little more natural bass out of it. We have here is P drums, which is an effects channel where I had a pretty high compressor. Very heavy compression with some EQ as well, and that is basically going to liven up the drums. You can see it's not very high in the mix at all, but bringing that in there kind of adds a little extra shazam to the to the drums. So the technique is called parallel compression, and we use something that's really squashed, and then we kind of bring it up to liven up the sound of the regular drum bus, which is over here. And over here, so I set it to P drums before fader is what this means. So that means it's going to be the signal before all these plugins. And here I had some EQ again, help out the kick. Compress this compressor again, you see I use it a lot. I do enjoy it. And limiter. So that's pretty much all that I have on the drums. And, you know, we get something that sounds like this. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So if you guys have any suggestions or critiques, leave them in the comments section below. I always go about this recording stuff as there are no real bad sounds. There's really only sounds that you prefer and sounds that you don't prefer. And the sounds you prefer might be the ones that someone else doesn't prefer, so they think it sounds bad while you think it sounds good. And, you know, it's just, there's always kind of you know, to each his own. I just think the drums sound pretty smooth for this groovy tune. I think it was appropriate. So let me know what you guys think. And again, the full song is in the description. I'll see you guys in the next video. Till next time.